Prince of Persia, Sands of Time. Swiftly moving towards the Vizier and the end of the game. This is no damage, no upgrades, and no rewinds, and we're moving into a puzzle in this grand library. A puzzle I really, really enjoy. It involves moving mirrors, interacting with Farah, and doing some kind of tier-based platforming that leads you all the way up to the top, and then opens the path to the rest of the game. There are a couple of moments in these mirrors. I know this is kind of like a traditional... There's a name for those turrets, isn't there? Those, like, towers in like, Middle Eastern design. But on these mirrors, they do look very phallic. Like, they just look like penises. And I don't know if that's just me being immature, but there's just a part of me that really just sees dicks. I don't know if I'm channeling LTG. I don't know what's happening here, but... And I can't remember the name of the bloody things either. Are they called minarets? There's a word for this architectural design that you see in mosques and you see in parts of Persia, as it was called, you know. But I can't remember the name. Somebody cooler than me has either Googled this or knows the name and is sharing it right now in the comments. So thank you very much for sharing. I wish I'd had you right now so I could immediately spout what you just said. But I do not. But platforming... And you'll notice in this game that there's that fabric I talked about. They really like the fabrics because it's new technology. But later on in the series, you use those fabrics to descend, which is really cool. There's a lot of mechanics they're going to add to this series in the later games that just make it even better than it is in this. And hopefully, if this continues to do well, guys, I can cover the rest of the series and you can get really, really nostalgic and excited about the idea of Warrior Within and Two Thrones. And if you're not so interested and it kind of stagnates, we can move on and do something else, because lots and lots of games to go back to, and we're about to get both Forspoken and Dead Space Remake, so 2 new games. Technically one of them is not so new, but it looks cool as hell and it could be really, really interesting. One of the things I'm most excited about the Dead Space Remake, if you're wondering, is that you no longer need to use the shop to buy weapons. So that means that if I do a no-shop run of that game, I can use any weapon in the game, because both weapons and upgrades for weapons are found in the world, and I think that's a fantastic change. So fingers crossed that game's not dogshit.
Where is that glow coming from?
But we have to move these platforms and continue forward, kicking ass as we do, as the prince. We've got a handful of moments where we're walking here. Whenever the piece of geometry you're on starts shaking like that, it tells you that it's going to break, and the area that breaks it's just a way of saying do not come this way. And you can kind of predict which area is going to break and then move accordingly, and you can dynamically always know where to go depending on where the things break, because as soon as they break, the game is telling you go the other way. And it's one of those pieces of level design that's not specifically described to you or shouted, but it's overt enough that you always see it and your brain goes, I get it. And that, to me, is perfect design. Any design that tells me what to do without telling me what to do is what a video game should aspire to always do. Like here right now, do you see the scratches on the floor? The scratches on that floor there are to tell you that that's where you need to put this puzzle piece. And it's quite subtle in the grand scheme of things, even though it stands out, you know, like a sore thumb. But it's subtle enough that you could miss it if you're not looking. This is the kind of thing that Ubisoft were just absolutely nailing at this point of their company with all the people working. And it wouldn't surprise me if the people that made this game and made all the games that were really good at this era aren't at that company anymore. Because I can't honestly understand how you can go from something so creative, like things like the Far Cry series, you know, like things like Splinter Cell. Like, did you know, guys, that now, in the space there's been between the last Splinter Cell and where we are right now, every single other Splinter Cell has been released? It's the most depressing statistic for a Splinter Cell fan you could ever read. In the space of 3 years, we went from Splinter Cell 1 to Chaos Theory. We went from concept to mastery of said concept in 3 years. And it's pretty much the same thing that happened with this series as well. This game came out in 2003, and then I think 2004 was Warrior Within, and then 2005 was Two Thrones. It's crazy to think that, isn't it? Nowadays, the only thing we get every year is sports games or Call of Duty, and if you play sports games, you know, you play sports games, that's pretty much all you can really say. And Call of Duty, like, has it ever really been fucking good? It's overstaying its welcome. Everybody hates it. The old game is great. The new game is trash. Like, it's just a constant, repetitive stroke of insanity, isn't it? On the flip side, though, to be a little bit more positive towards the mighty French Canadians, I do think they can salvage it, because if they're capable of pushing out games like this year on year with the right people and the right support and the right ideas, they can do it again. And technology is getting better every year. It's getting easier to interact with. It's getting more expensive, sadly, but these companies are big. They have the money, you know? And spending some money sure takes the sting out of failing as a company, I would think. But the problem is the risk, isn't it? That's always the problem with AAA. That's the reason why video games seem to have stagnated in many ways, because it's just too expensive to make them now, because every game has to compete with these incredible budgets, these unbelievable marketing campaigns. You know, when you think of the money that some companies are paying streamers to advertise their games, and they're paying multiple streamers to do so, and it's obviously a very, very good idea, because the range and the reach that these streamers have is absurd. And then you get those people, don't you? Have you ever seen it on IGN, where you check an article on IGN that talks about anything to do with streaming or YouTubing or anything of that nature, and you always get that same dude. I feel like it's his full-time job. I don't understand why somebody would like to watch somebody else play games. It's just like, what is this guy doing? How do you not get this? This is like a caveman somewhere being like, fire is a mistake. I don't believe in using the fire, and only bad things will happen if we give in to the flames of desire. And you're sitting there being like, fuck off, Grug, you moron. And I'm all for being wary of new technology and wary of new culture, but there comes a point where you have to take yourself out of the equation. How can you not understand something just because you don't like it? Can you not move your own bias away for just a second to kind of go, well, let's look at what this is offering. Let's look at what people are receiving from this. Where's the goal? What's the product? What's the gimmick, you know? Where is the market for this? Can you not just appraise it in a way that doesn't involve you? And I never get that. Because like, there's lots of things I don't like and lots of things I don't engage with. This is that jump I mentioned, by the way, guys. This is kind of awkward. So when you fall here, try to roll, because if you don't, sometimes you take damage. And right here, there's a jump. See this jump? It's really awkward to make the prince jump. He keeps falling down. So that there looks easy, but it's not. You can drop down and jump backwards, but I found that that was way more awkward to do, so I did it that way instead. That jump looks easy, guys. That jump took me about 15 attempts. I wish I was joking. And then we get a new sword. And there's a super funny gimmick in this game. Every time the prince gets a new sword, he bangs it on the ground. And I don't know if you know anything about Forged in Fire, the mightiest TV show on the internet. But if you forge a sword and then immediately bang it on concrete, you're probably going to chip your fucking sword. Like, that's one way to break a sword. You know how you see these movies where people fence with katanas and they're doing like all kinds of catching each other's blades and doing like, you know, shows of strength and tests of might? It's like, that's just not how that works, dude. This is some movie magic bullshit right now. You do that with a katana, your katana's turned into a fork. Like, come on. Anyhow, this is a tricky fight, this, guys. This one took a while. And it's not because it's particularly difficult, it's because it's really long and it's really claustrophobic, and if you get unlucky, you can fall off. Additionally, if you get unlucky, you can climb those pillars next to me, and the pillar climbing leads to this awkward monkey dance, where you like flail your sword, throw your own feces, and then the zookeeper comes and shoots you. But fundamentally, the only real problem you'll face here is getting bad detection because of how close your opponents will be to the wall. But again, same strategies, guys. We've got a new sword. It's a good sword. We're going to be using brown guys to beat up blue guys by using sand powers. And if the game cooperates, which it's not doing right now, we're hopefully going to win with as little incident as possible. And it looked easy, didn't it? God, these fights look easy. It's very frustrating as well, because they're not easy, guys. And the problem with this game is a lot of the fights don't have good checkpoints, so you end up having to do far more than you'd like to do. But the joys of editing makes it seem like I'm this god that does everything effortlessly, and it's simply not the case. I think we're moving towards the observatory here, aren't we? This was a puzzle that really confused me, but I think it's at the top of this area. I don't think we're quite there yet. And we've got some pipe swinging, or pole swinging. I don't know why I called them pipes. It is the observatory, yeah. So when you twist these mechanisms, it's going to rotate this celestial setup, and it's not exactly clear where you're going. You know, the game is kind of leaving this in your hands, and it can be quite confusing. But the main pillar of what you want to be doing is getting to this central strut, this area here, and then getting to this pillar, and make sure to mash circle when you land or you'll take damage there. And then you want to rotate this so that when you get to the middle pillar, you can then go to the other area where the lever is. And it's again, it's not the most obvious thing, what you're doing, but you spin them enough times and you jump enough times to realise where you're going. This puzzle here, I think, is one of the most difficult ones to read in the game, and I just think it's because they wanted you to flip around and jump around all this wonderful rotating solar system stuff. And it's really cool, but it's a little bit unclear considering everything else is kind of well shown. But I think there's only one sword left, and we've got the big dick sword, the best sword in the game, which is really fun to use. But this is me kind of making sure that they're lined up, and then thinking, have I got to twist it again, or am I okay? And it turns out I think I'm okay. And then you go, is it that way? And then you can drop down. Yeah, this is the end of the puzzle. If you get to this lever and it spins everything and it gives you the cutscene, you've done it right. And then the door opens, and there you go, guys. End of room. High concept, elegant. And then you get to slide on these ropes, which is something I wish the game did a bit more of. Because you don't have that many opportunities to descend poles in this game outside of a couple of trees and this particular moment. Although I do love the conceit of video games where everybody slides down ropes incredibly fast and none of them have gloves on or any kind of apparatus, they're just beasts.
Wait, let's see where this
But that's the suspension, isn't it, of what you have to give the game. Because half these situations you can't really do. Like, can you imagine jumping off a cliff and then landing on a ledge and then gripping it with your fingers? Unless you're one of the greatest, like, mountain climbers in the world, or wall climbers, or finger hangers, you just don't have the strength to hold your entire body weight on such a small hold. Like, if you can hold your full body weight crimping with one hand, you're a god. But I just don't think most people in video games have put that much time in, you know? I love rolling under the blades, though. Doesn't it look cool? And now we have a big fight with a couple of these captains. But you can jump over these captains, apparently. For some reason, I thought you couldn't jump over these boys. Maybe they just block everything. I guess we'll find out in a moment on that guy on his own. Yeah, I give these guys way more respect than they deserve. Fortunately, I've got a really, really good strategy for that room at the end of the game where they become a problem. But wall attacks work, jump attacks seemingly worked. Maybe I've been just being afraid of them for no reason. And then we get to climb up the ladder and do the bit of platforming. This is easy to reset on as well because there's a couple of moments where there's some birds that might peck you, and the camera turns perspective on one of these jumps and it can make it really easy to jump the wrong way. So this jump here, see this? You are not as lined up as you think you are when you try to line that up. The trick to making that jump to that rope is to not be lined up. The perspective is a nightmare. But I just love this area, and I've talked about how I think this game and this series has some of my favourite level design in games. I'm not a big fan of you know, like, platforming to puzzle, platforming to puzzle, platforming to puzzle. That's not my favourite thing, even though I think this game does it very elegantly. But what I do like about this is every room you enter is clearly part of the same universe, clearly part of the same world, but it all looks visually interesting. They constantly keep you seemingly doing the same things, but they're always adjusting how they look. Like even a moment such as this where we're moving these mechanisms to open a door. Every room you twist that has one of these levers tends to be a different looking room that's been designed artistically to kind of catch your eye so you don't realize you're just twisting a thing around. And I really love that. I also love that you come into these rooms, and the rooms are essentially just playgrounds. They are platforming playgrounds, but each of them has got this wonderful aesthetic that sits nestled firmly in the world while still being fresh and interesting. And I think one of the reasons why I am so harsh on modern gaming is because I grew up on games that were ticking the boxes that I find essential and need to be ticked. I was having a conversation on my stream the other day with somebody on Elden Ring, and they seem to be somebody that likes Elden Ring and is willing to forgive some of the parts that I can't, you know. And I really like Elden Ring, but I don't love it. And I don't love it because of these glaring holes in its design. And I could talk for hours about my issues with that game. I have talked for hours about my issues with that game. But there are aspects of its pacing and its progression which I just don't even think they remotely work, and I think they're undercut on almost every value. And one of the areas, like, look at this corridor right now. It's subtly shifted to like a dirty teal. It's stone flags, it's just got simple architecture, it's got some of the patterns, it's got the same cohesions and some of the tapestries, but it's shifted that pallor. And it's just another one of those loading corridors where we take on scarabs, but I find it so elegant. This game does it really well. A game like Elden Ring doesn't. And there's a lot of things that really irritate me, but the two examples that I was trying to talk about was Elden Ring has a problem with repeating enemies in several zones where they simply shouldn't be. And it undercuts the combat, it undercuts the exploration, and it undercuts the sense of discovery. And what happens is, the more you explore Elden Ring, the more you hurt yourself when you go on the designated path that leads to the endings. Because if you look everywhere in that world, by the time you get to the end of the game, you've seen every enemy at the end of the game. And to me, that's a problem. That's a fundamental flaw with the game that I can't see past. I can't get past that. There's no forgiving it to me. I think it's unforgivable. Can you imagine if at the end of Dark Souls 1 you went in the kiln and it was hollows from the Berg? Would it matter to you? Probably not, because the kiln is this dramatic, very tragic region where this failed king tried to protect his domain and failed. You know? And then you have the 1v1 with Gwyn and it's fucking awesome. But that's not how it works, is it, guys? You see those Silver Knights get charred into the Black Knights. You see those ghostly spectres of those Black Knights walking, an enemy you saw at the start of the game, but you only saw one of them, and they were rare. You barely saw that creature, depending on how long you played that game. And then when you went into the kiln, you stamped on the ash, you walked forward, and they were there. The Knights of Gwyn. In his burial site, essentially. In his failed throne. Fucking wonderful concept. Hardest enemies in the game for some people. Walking around this dark and brooding build-up to a final boss. It's exceptional. What happens when you go to the Consecrated Waste, guys? To seek the mountaintop of the giants so that you can finally burn the Erd Tree to get to the Elden Throne. What happens? You go to a snowy location that looks amazing. It looks so atmospheric, it looks so great. And the first enemy you bump into is an enemy you've seen in every fucking part of the game. Vulgar militiamen. And they have the same weapons, they look the same, they do the same things. You've already fought them, you've already killed them, you've already realised they don't really drop anything good. Why even bother? You've undercut the end of your game. Fundamentally. And I can't get past that. And it really bugs me. And the particular argument that I was talking about the other day was, it was the idea that I think that the Flesh God, I call them Flesh God, they're called Godskin. The Godskin Apostles are a very lazy, uninspired boss. Speaking of progressions of the outfits, guys, we are now technically the Prince of Persia. We've taken off the armour, we've finally been completely damaged, and now we're running around as an absolute baller. We are the John McClane we were always fated to be, and I think he looks awesome in this game. What a great design. What a wonderful homage to where this game started, and where this series started. But the Godskins are these enemies that have got pretty good lore. They're quite interesting if you learn about them, and I quite like the skinny one's moveset. I despise the fat one's moveset, and I don't like how they play off each other. I believe they are two enemies that were never designed to be together. They're just a terrible boss in many ways, and they're mandatory too, which I think is really funny, because there are far better fights in that game that are optional that they could have put there that I think would have made the game better. But my problem with that fight is not its design, it's what it means to the game. And I know you can throw sleep pots at them, guys, I know you can hit them with sleep. I played my first playthrough with a sleep weapon. Incredibly effective against the Godskins, but that's not the point, guys. We're not talking about how you can use a single gimmick to completely shut them down, which I think is a design flaw unto itself. I'm talking about what they mean conceptually. This is a long fight, this, by the way. So imagine you play Dark Souls 1, and you do whatever area you do first in Dark Souls, and you get to the boss, and it's Ornstein, right? Then, you play a bunch more of the game, you get to another dungeon, and you do that dungeon, and you get to the top of that dungeon, and the boss is Smo. Now imagine you get to Anor Londo, and you fight Ornstein and Smo. Do you think that would severely compromise and undercut the value and the legend of that fight, as it's known to this day, Ornstein and Smo, an infamous fight in the series? Do you think that would have had the same weight, the same impact, and the same interest if you'd have seen both of those guys earlier and beat them up earlier, and now they just put them together lazily at the end? Because I don't think it would have. And this is where Elden Ring falls down, you see. They took a long time to make a beautiful world, but they didn't take the same amount of time to fill it correctly. And I just can't get around that, me. And it's one of the reasons why, when I talk about Elden Ring, it comes off as incredibly negative sometimes, because the game frustrates me. And it frustrates me by what it could have been if it was closer to a Souls game, and less like a fucking Ubisoft Assassin's Creed. Because I just don't think it added anything, you know? And I get into these conversations a lot, because I have a lot of strong feelings on Elden Ring. But when I come to a game like this, you could argue that this game is the same thing repeatedly, you know? Platforming, puzzle, combat, platforming, puzzle, combat, platforming, puzzle, combat. And it is. But did you notice how it's adding new enemies? Enemies that aren't in the other parts of the game? Did you notice how it's changing the environment, so even though you're doing the same thing, you get the illusion that you're doing something new because you're doing it in a different feeling zone? And this is a game from 20 years ago where the hardware limitations were different. You can't build Elden Ring in this fucking engine at this time. You can't fit it on the disc. So why do it now? You know, sometimes there's a really important thing when it comes to making anything. And it's the Jurassic Park logic, isn't it? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Elden Ring is too big. This game is a perfect size. Thank you for watching, and you take care now.